7:55 a.m. December 7, 1941. Berth F-6, Battleship Row, Pearl Harbor Territory of Hawaii. The battleship USS West Virginia rides quietly at her moorings, 624 feet of gray steel tied outboard of USS Tennessee along the shore of Ford Island. Sunday breakfast is over. Church services are about to begin. Ammunition is locked away. Most of the ship's guns sit idle, their crews off watch. Below decks, mess attendant second class Doris, Dorie, Miller, 22 years old, moves through the ship's laundry area with a canvas bag of uniforms over his shoulder. He is big for a sailor, over 6 feet tall, more than 200 pounds, a former farmhand from Waco, Texas, turned Navy messman. His world, up to this moment, is trays, dishes, and officers' laundry tags. He has no idea that, in 2 minutes, the first torpedo of the Pacific War will hit his ship. At 7:57, the comm breaks. A Japanese torpedo slams into West Virginia's port side with a violent metallic crack. The shock travels through the hull, rattling steel frames and bulkheads. The ship lurches to port as a column of water and oil erupts outside. Within seconds, more torpedoes follow, Type 91 aerial torpedoes dropped from low-flying aircraft, modified with wooden tails so they can run in the shallow harbor. The general quarters alarm screams to life. Miller drops the bag of laundry and runs. He knows his designated battle station, an anti-aircraft ammunition magazine deeper inside the ship. His job in action is supposed to be simple: move .50 caliber belts and other ammunition from secure storage up toward the guns, feeding the ship's air defenses with the rounds they need to fire. No one has trained him to shoot. They have trained him to carry. At roughly 7:58, with the alarms still howling, he joins the flow of sailors in the passageway. Men are heading for gun mounts, engine rooms, repair parties, medical stations. The sound of impact and distant explosions rolls through the hull in irregular waves. When he reaches the compartment where his magazine should be, he stops short. It is no longer there. The magazine section has been wrecked by a torpedo hit, twisted plating, buckled frames, smoke and spray forcing in through ruptures in the hull. Water is already flooding in, rising over twisted deck plates. The space is smashed beyond use. No ammunition will be passed from here. On paper, his role in the battle just ended in the first minutes of the attack. Instead of freezing, he remembers the standing order drilled into every sailor. If your station is destroyed or unreachable, you report to the ship's internal crossroads, the junction informally called Times Square. That is where stray men get reassigned, where officers plug gaps with whoever is left. He turns and runs again. As he moves aft along the passageway, West Virginia takes more punishment. Torpedoes wreck compartments along the port side. Overhead, high-level bombers and dive bombers are starting their runs, dropping modified naval shells and general-purpose bombs at the anchored battleships. The concussions grow heavier, closer. Paint flakes from overhead. Light bulbs shatter. Around 8:02, Miller reaches the junction. Officers and chief petty officers are already grabbing men, sorting them, dispatching them toward fire parties, repair lockers, and medical stations. Miller reports himself ready for duty. His rank and rate, mess attendant second class, make him, in the Navy's pre-war system, one of the lowest status men on the ship. Black sailors are restricted to the messman branch. Their official role is to cook, clean, and serve. Combat jobs belong to others. But the torpedoes have not checked the Navy's personnel manual. An officer, accounts differ on who first redirects him, sends Miller toward the ship's bridge area to help with casualties. The command spaces have been hit. The captain is wounded. They need strong backs. At about 8:05, Miller climbs ladder after ladder toward the conning tower and flag bridge. The ship is already listing. Passageways are slick with water and oil. Men push past each other, some going up, some going down, some carrying wounded. Emergency lighting throws harsh shadows. The air smells of burning fuel and cordite. On the bridge level, they find Captain Mervyn S. Benyon, commanding officer of West Virginia. Benyon has been hit by fragments from a bomb that detonated on or near the adjacent battleship. Shrapnel has torn deep into his abdomen. He is bleeding heavily but still at his post, issuing orders. Miller and other sailors try to move him to a safer position, but the captain resists. He insists on remaining on the bridge, protesting any attempt to carry him below. His concern is for the ship, not his wounds. Miller does what he can, cushions him, shields him from debris, helps keep him upright. Outside, the attack intensifies. By roughly 8:10, Japanese Aichi D-3 Val dive bombers are rolling in from altitude, dropping into near-vertical attack runs. Their engines scream as they dive. Anti-aircraft fire from other ships begins to thicken, but at Battleship Row miniguns are still unmanned, their ammunition locked away or their crews struggling to reach positions through smoke and flooding. On West Virginia, torpedoes continue to hit along the port side. The ship's damage control teams counterflood compartments on the starboard side to keep her from capsizing. This emergency flooding will eventually cause the ship to settle upright on the harbor bottom instead of rolling over like USS Oklahoma, but in these minutes it only adds to the sense that the deck underfoot is sliding away. The bridge is becoming a trap. Another officer orders Miller down from the bridge area to the port side anti-aircraft battery. They need ammunition moved. They need extra hands. There is no time for detailed instructions. At around 8:15, Miller moves toward the open decks. When he steps out into the open air on the port side, the view is catastrophic. Ahead, USS Arizona is already fatally wounded. A massive explosion has blown her forward magazine, sending a fireball high above the harbor. Where a battleship stood minutes before, there is a broken hull and a towering column of smoke. To starboard, Tennessee is trapped inboard of West Virginia, squeezed against the quay. Oil burns on the water. The air is hot and dirty. On a portside anti-aircraft station, a Browning .50 caliber machine gun mount sits ready, but unmanned. The gun itself is the Navy's version of the Browning M2 heavy machine gun. Chambered in .50 BMG, 12.7 by 99 millimeters, the weapon weighs roughly 80 to 100 pounds in its water-cooled naval configuration, not counting the pedestal mount. It feeds from disintegrating metal link belts, usually in 100-round segments that can be linked together. Its cyclic rate is around 450 to 600 rounds per minute, with effective fire against low-flying aircraft out to roughly 1,800 meters, especially when using armor-piercing and incendiary ammunition. Right now, none of that matters if no one is behind the grips. Miller has been told to bring ammunition, not to fire. But the gunner for this mount is down or missing. The splinter shield doesn't protect an empty seat. The feed tray sits open, a belt of .50 caliber rounds already laid in place, the big brass cases catching the light of the fires around the harbor. No one is there to shoot. Miller has watched these guns in training. He has seen how the gunners spin the mount, how they elevate and depress the barrel, how they thumb the butterfly triggers and handle belt changes. He has never been formally instructed. Nobody scheduled a black mess attendant for gunnery school. He looks at the sky. Another wave of dive bombers and torpedo planes is lining up. He makes a decision. He climbs into the gunner's position. He grabs the twin grips, shoulders in behind the armored shield, and sets his feet against the listing deck. An officer nearby reportedly gives him a quick instruction: how to work the triggers, how to track targets. That's all he gets. He thumbs the butterfly triggers. The .50 caliber machine gun slams to life, the heavy bolts cycling at high speed. The gun's roaring is a deep, rhythmic hammering. Empty brass cases pour out of the ejection port in a glittering stream. Each round, roughly 700 grains of metal and chemical energy, leaves the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, streaking out in a line of tracers toward the incoming Japanese aircraft. At approximately 8:18, Doris Miller stops being just a mess attendant. For the next few minutes, He is one of West Virginia's only working anti-aircraft gunners. Dive bombers slide through his field of fire. He tracks them with the crude ring and post sight, leading his targets, firing ahead of them. He aims for engines and cockpits, for the point where metal, fuel, and oxygen intersect. The Browning bucks against its mount as he holds the triggers down, then feathers them into shorter bursts as he finds the rhythm. Other sailors feed belts into the gun. When one belt ends, the roar stops only long enough to slap a new belt into place, rack the charging handle, and fire again. Later, witnesses will argue over the number of planes he hits: 1, 2, 4, as many as 6. Some recall seeing enemy aircraft stagger and trail smoke under his fire before crashing into the harbor or distant terrain. Official records will credit him with at least one confirmed aircraft destroyed, acknowledging that the chaos of the attack makes precise counts impossible. In the moment, Miller does not count. He doesn't track score. He tracks silhouettes, wingspans, angles of attack. He fires until he has no ammunition left to feed the gun and his ship is clearly settling into the mud of the harbor floor. By 8:25, less than half an hour after the first torpedo struck West Virginia, a man the Navy never intended to be a gunner has just fought one of the most desperate small-unit air defense actions in its history, a single untrained sailor on a .50 caliber mount, standing in against a perfectly planned surprise attack. Around him, the battle for Pearl Harbor is still raging. For Doris Miller, the real fight, the one over whether his actions will be recognized, remembered, or forgotten, is only beginning. 8:26 a.m. December 7, 1941. Port Side, USS West Virginia, Battleship Row. The last .50 caliber belt runs empty. The Browning's heavy roar stops, replaced by the higher, scattered chatter of other guns farther along the harbor. Miller lifts his thumbs from the triggers. Smoke curls from the water-cooled barrel jacket. An empty belt of links hangs from the feed tray. Brass casings lie ankle-deep on the deck around his boots. He looks for more ammunition. There isn't any. The ship is listing hard now. Counter-flooding has kept her from rolling over, but it has also driven her lower into the harbor. The deck angle has changed. Oil-coated water laps closer to the gun tubs. Fires rage on nearby ships. The sky still drills with the sound of engines, but the first wave of torpedo planes is passing, replaced by scattered bombers and strafing fighters. For the moment, his gun is silent, and so is his sector. Miller steps back from the mount. Without orders, he turns toward the nearest group of men hauling a wounded sailor. A bomb fragment or splinter has torn through the man's leg. Blood soaks his trouser leg and pools on the steel deck. Two sailors are dragging him by the armpits. They are losing their grip on the slick metal. Miller moves in, grabs hold, and lifts. At around 8:30, he shifts roles again, from ad hoc gunner back to stretcher bearer and damage control muscle. He helps carry the wounded towards safer spaces, down into compartments less exposed to blast and shrapnel, toward improvised aid stations already crammed with casualties. The pace is brutal. He moves one man, then another, then another. Some can walk with help. Some cannot. The air in the interior passageways is hot and smoky. Voices echo in the confined spaces, shouted orders, cries of pain, the unbroken drone of the general quarters alarm. Around 8:40, the worst of the initial air assault on Battleship Row is ending. It has lasted less than an hour. In that time, USS West Virginia has taken multiple torpedo hits and at least 2 bomb hits. She is burning, flooding, and slowly settling into the mud in about 40 feet of water. Her upper decks are still above the surface. Her crew is still fighting fires, plugging holes, and rescuing trapped shipmates as best they can. By 9 o'clock, organized damage control efforts have taken shape. Repair parties move with axes, hoses, and shoring timber. Fire mains are charged where the plumbing still works. Hoses snake along passageways. Some compartments have already been sealed, with men trapped inside them. Some will not be opened again until days later. The smell of fuel oil hangs over everything. Miller cycles between duty and opportunity. Whenever he spots men struggling with a wounded sailor, he joins them. Whenever a ladder needs someone at the top and bottom to pass a stretcher, he takes a position. He is too valuable as raw strength to be tied to any single detail. The same physique that made him a favored ship's boxer now makes him a one-man hauling machine. Sometime after 9 o'clock, orders shift. The realization hardens among West Virginia's officers. The ship is lost for the day. She is settling on the bottom. Her main batteries are silent. Her list is stabilized, but her fighting capacity is gone. The focus turns fully to saving lives and preventing the wreck from becoming a total inferno. Miller ends up back near the superstructure, again within sight of the bridge. Captain Benyon is still there. The captain's condition is worse. Blood loss and internal injuries are catching up with him. Miller and others again try to move him, to carry him clear. Benyon refuses. Accounts from survivors describe him insisting that his men leave him and focus on saving the ship. He orders them away. Miller does not argue. He obeys the captain's last clear command the only way he can, by leaving him there and going back to work. Late in the morning, sometime around 10 o'clock, general quarters remains in effect, but the pace of enemy attack has slowed. The second wave of Japanese aircraft has come and gone. Fires still burn. Ammunition still sporadically cooks off, sending arcs of sparks into the air. But the organized bombing and torpedo runs are over. By 10:30, West Virginia is resting on the harbor bottom, her deck edge near the waterline, smoke rising from her superstructure. Inside the ship, some compartments are in total darkness. Men trapped below decks use hammers and any available metal to bang on bulkheads, signaling their presence. Rescue teams listen, mark, and cut. It will take days to reach some of them. Miller keeps hauling. He does not know that officers and petty officers have already started noting names and faces, the men who kept going, the men who cracked, the men who went far beyond what anyone could have expected. In the chaos, formal records are patchy, but impressions stick. By early afternoon, triage areas on Ford Island and along the shore are overwhelmed. Miller eventually leaves the immediate sides of the battleship to help move wounded sailors from the quay to collection points farther inland. Ambulances, trucks, and even commandeered cars come and go. He lifts stretchers onto vehicles until his arms ache and his uniform is stiff with dried blood and oil. At some point after 1,400 hours, the worst of the emergency hauling is over. The surviving crew of West Virginia begins to reorganize into fatigue details, security watches, and salvage parties. The attack is over. The war is not. Men stare back across the harbor at the line of crippled battleships. Arizona a burning grave, Oklahoma capsized, California and Nevada damaged and settled. The battle line, that was supposed to deter any enemy, has been beaten in under 2 hours. For mess attendants like Miller, the official story should now return to its old tracks. Cooking, cleaning, routine. But the story has already slipped its tracks. In the days after the attack, officers aboard West Virginia compile reports of what happened. They list torpedo hits and bomb impacts. They list fires fought, compartments flooded, guns manned. And they list names. Among those names is Mess Attendant Second Class Doris Miller. He is cited for 3 things. First, for carrying his mortally wounded captain from a position of extreme danger to greater safety. Second, for manning and operating a .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun without previous training. Third, for assisting in the care and evacuation of wounded comrades throughout the attack. The wording is formal. The reality behind it is simple. When everything went wrong at once, Miller ran toward the danger and kept going. At first, recognition is slow. On January 1, 1942, the Navy releases a list of commendations from the Pearl Harbor attack. Miller's name appears as an unnamed Negro messman who displayed distinguished devotion to duty. The language reflects the segregation and prejudice of the time. Even in praise, the institution cannot bring itself to print his name. But word spreads. Early 1942 is a tense and uncertain period for the United States. The Pacific War has begun badly. Guam has fallen. Wake Island has been lost. The Philippines are under siege. Newspapers and radio networks look for stories of courage and resistance. By late January and February, journalists begin to piece together the story of the big messman from Texas who stood behind a .50 caliber gun on West Virginia and fired back at the attackers. Civil rights organizations and black newspapers seize on the story, pressing the Navy to give him full recognition. They name him publicly. They demand awards. On March 12, 1942, the Navy awards Miller the Navy Cross, its second highest decoration for valor in combat. The presentation takes place on May 27, 1942, aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, pins the medal to Miller's uniform. In his brief remarks, Nimitz says that this marks the first time in the Pacific Fleet that such a high honor has been awarded to a man of Miller's rating and branch. The Navy Cross citation notes that Miller, in the face of enemy fire, displayed extraordinary courage and disregard for his own personal safety. For the 24-year-old sailor, standing at attention in his dress uniform on the carrier's deck, the moment is as formal and structured as the chaos of December 7th was wild and unplanned. Cameras click. Reporters take notes. The photograph of a tall black sailor receiving a high decoration from a four-star admiral becomes part of the war's visual record. But medals do not end wars, and they do not end segregation. After the ceremony, Miller returns to duty. He is still, officially, a mess attendant. The Navy Cross on his chest does not change his rating. It does not open doors to officer training or technical ratings closed to black sailors. He can inspire. He cannot yet fully break the system. In the months that follow, he will be in demand for war bond tours and public appearances, speaking to crowds about service, sacrifice, and the need to win. His story will be told in magazines and on radio programs. For many Americans, he will become the best-known black sailor of the war. But the Pacific still needs ships and men on the line, and the Navy will eventually send him back into the fight. Summer 1942. United States mainland. War bond tours and speeches. The image is neat and controlled. In city after city, Doris Miller stands on stages in front of flags and microphones. He is in dress blues, shoes shined, ribbons in precise rows on his chest. The Navy Cross sits over his left pocket. He talks about duty, about December 7th, about staying calm under fire. Crowds cheer. Bands play. War bond totals rise. On paper, this is his new mission, inspire. On trains between cities, the mood is quieter. Segregation is still the law across much of the United States. Even in uniform, with one of the Navy's top valor awards on his chest, he faces the same restrictions as any other black man traveling through certain states. Separate facilities. Limited hotels. Some doors that open only grudgingly, some not at all. He does not forget. He gives the speeches anyway. By late 1942, the war has spread across the globe. The Pacific Fleet has fought at Coral Sea and Midway. Guadalcanal is underway. Carriers and cruisers trade blows with Japanese task forces. The Navy needs every trained sailor it can get. The war bond tour ends. Orders cut. Miller returns to sea duty. November 1942. Pacific Ocean. He reports aboard the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis, a 610-foot Portland-class cruiser armed with 9 8-inch guns, 8 5-inch dual-purpose mounts, and arrays of smaller anti-aircraft weapons. The ship serves as flagship of various task groups. She is faster and leaner than West Virginia, built for speed and gunfire support rather than standing in line of battle. Miller's rating has changed. He is now Cook Third Class. The promotion reflects time in service and good conduct. It does not move him out of the messman branch. He still works in galleys, storerooms, and pantries. But the men aboard know his story. It follows him like a shadow. In the cruiser's wardroom, officers sometimes glance at the tall cook and remember the photograph of him receiving the Navy Cross. On the mess decks, younger sailors nudge each other when he walks by, whispering, "That's him. That's the guy from Pearl." He does not dwell on it. He works his watch, stands his normal duties, and, when the ship goes to general quarters, moves to whatever support station he has been assigned, usually deep in the ship, far from the open gun tubs where he once stood behind a .50. The war rolls on. Throughout early 1943, ships like Indianapolis escort carriers support amphibious landings and provide gunfire support for island operations. The Navy's doctrine has shifted. The battleship line is no longer the core of Pacific power. Carriers and their aircraft now dominate. Escort carriers, smaller, slower, more lightly armored ships, join the fleet in growing numbers, carrying a few dozen aircraft each to support landings and protect convoys. In mid-1943, Miller receives new orders. He is reassigned from Indianapolis to a new ship, USS Liscum Bay, CV-56, a Casablanca-class escort carrier. This class is mass-produced warship design. Displacing around 10,000 tons, 512 feet in length, with a beam of about 65 feet at the waterline and 108 feet across the flight deck, these ships carry about 28 to 30 aircraft, Wildcats and Avengers, fighters and torpedo bombers. Their armament includes a single 5-inch gun, plus multiple 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft mounts. They are valuable but vulnerable. Their thin armor and large aviation fuel and bomb stowage spaces make them lethal if they are hit. October 1943. Pacific en route to the Central Pacific. Liscum Bay joins Task Group 52.3, part of the force designated to support Operation Galvanic, the assault on the Gilbert Islands. The objective is to seize bases in the Central Pacific, starting with BDO at Tarawa and Butaritari at Macon. From these islands, the United States can begin its march west toward the Marshall Islands, then the Marianas, and beyond. On board Liscum Bay, Cook Third Class Miller returns to the rhythms of a combat ship preparing for action. At 5 o'clock, reveille sounds. Galley crews are already at work, producing breakfast for hundreds of men. On an escort carrier, food movement is as critical as ammunition movement. Hungry men don't work well. The ship schedule runs on precise watches: flight operations, fueling, arming, maintenance, gunnery drills, damage control practice. Miller is part of the quiet machinery that keeps the ship alive between battles. He knows the stakes. Only 2 years earlier, he watched a battleship die in a shallow harbor. Now he walks passageways under a wooden flight deck stacked with aviation gasoline, bombs, torpedoes, and fully fueled aircraft. He understands at an instinctive level that if anything goes catastrophically wrong up top, a bomb, a torpedo, a fire, the whole ship can go with it. November 20th to 23rd, 1943. Gilbert Islands, Central Pacific. Operation Galvanic begins. Carrier aircraft from Liscum Bay and sister ships strike Japanese positions on Macon Atoll. They fly anti-submarine patrols and close air support sorties for the Marines and soldiers on the beaches. Wildcats strafe and bomb. Avengers carry bombs and depth charges. The days are long and hot. On board, general quarters sounds frequently, at dawn, at dusk, whenever enemy air or submarine threats are suspected. Men sleep in their clothes. Damage control parties stay alert. The escort carriers maneuver in formation with destroyers and destroyer escorts screening around them. By November 23rd, Macon is effectively secured. The Japanese garrison is broken. The immediate battle seems won. The danger is not. For November 24th, 1943. Off Macon, aboard USS Liscum Bay. Before dawn, the carrier's crew wakes to standard pre-dawn routines. The ship is part of a task group cruising about 20 miles southwest of Macon. Flight operations will resume after first light. Anti-submarine patrols will go out again. It is, on the surface, another day of war. In the dark water to the southwest, a Japanese submarine stalks the formation. The boat is I-175, a medium-sized fleet submarine armed with Type 95 torpedoes, oxygen-fueled, fast, and deadly. The submarine's crew has been tracking the task group, waiting for a clean shot. Around 5:05, the submarine's torpedo tubes are ready. On Liscum Bay, many men are at breakfast or moving toward their dawn stations. Others are still in their bunks, half-dressed, waiting for the inevitable general quarters alarm. At approximately 5:10, it happens. A lookout on a nearby destroyer spots a torpedo wake cutting the water. The warning comes too late. A torpedo slams into Liscum Bay's starboard side, just aft of amidships. The impact is sharp and brutal, but it is what follows that kills the ship. The torpedo has struck near the carrier's after-bomb magazine. A fraction of a second after the detonation, the shock wave triggers sympathetic explosions among stored bombs. What begins as one blast becomes many. A massive secondary explosion rips up through the ship's interior, venting through the flight deck. Men on nearby vessels see a huge column of flame and debris roaring skyward, carrying aircraft parts, structural beams, and fragments of the ship itself. Lights go out across Liscum Bay. Bulkheads shear. Passageways fill with smoke and flame. Compartments tear open to the sea. For men like Miller, wherever they are in that instant, galley, mess deck, passageway, the world becomes a tumbling, dark, choking chaos. There is no steady transition from peace to action as there was at Pearl Harbor. There is only the instant shock of total damage. In the minutes after impact, surviving crewmen fight a losing battle. Some try to reach damage control stations, but firefighting equipment has been destroyed. Others attempt to launch lifeboats and rafts, but many are blown overboard with the initial blast. The ship lists and settles rapidly. Communication systems fail. Orders degrade into shouted fragments in the dark. By 5:20, the situation is hopeless. The carrier is mortally wounded. Fires reach aviation fuel and more ordnance. The stern begins to sag. The list increases. Men who can still move head for the edges, jumping into the oil-slick water, grabbing anything that floats. Rafts, planks, even loose debris. By some estimates, Liscum Bay sinks within 23 minutes of the torpedo hit. Roughly 916 men were aboard. Only about 272 will be rescued. Cook third-class Doris Miller is not among them. He is officially listed as missing in action, later presumed killed. There is no detailed record of his final actions in those dark minutes. No gun tub where witnesses remember him standing. No long, measured defense like on December 7th. Only a sudden explosion, a ship dying quickly, and hundreds of men lost beneath the Central Pacific. The Navy notifies his family months later. For his mother in Texas, the news is devastating but not entirely unexpected. She has known, ever since he went back to sea, that war does not care about metals. A Navy Cross does not make steel any softer or fire any cooler. Miller is posthumously awarded the Purple Heart. By the end of 1943, the United States has lost a young man who proved, under fire, that the boundaries set around him by policy and prejudice had nothing to do with his actual ability or courage. In a purely tactical sense, his death changes nothing about the course of the Pacific War. Operations go on. New ships join the fleet. New sailors take their places at guns and galleys. In a deeper sense, his absence leaves a question. What would a navy and a country look like if men like him were allowed to reach their full potential from the start, instead of only in the accidents of crisis? The answer will take decades to emerge. Late 1940s. United States. The war ends without him. The telegram about Doris Miller's presumed death has already been delivered. His mother has read the words no family wants to see, missing in action, presumed killed. Victory in the Pacific does not change that. Celebrations in August 1945 roll across the country, But in the Miller household, victory feels quieter, edged with absence. In the official records, his story is compact. Mess attendant second class Doris Miller, later cook third class, distinguished himself at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, by manning a .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun without training and by assisting wounded shipmates under fire. He received the Navy Cross. He continued in service. He died aboard USS Liscum Bay when the ship was sunk by a torpedo off Macon on November 24, 1943. His file fits in a folder. But his story doesn't stay there. Through the rest of the 1940s, the United States wrestles with what the war has revealed. Black Americans fought in every theater, in segregated infantry units, as pilots in the Tuskegee Airmen, as stevedores, drivers, medics, and sailors. They wore the same uniform as everyone else. They bled the same on every front. Yet the institutions they served are still segregated. In the Navy, black sailors are still largely confined to the steward and messman branches, serving food and cleaning quarters for white officers. Stories like Miller's sit uncomfortably inside that structure. A mess attendant who became an effective gunner in combat simply by stepping forward is hard to reconcile with a system that says he is only suited to carry trays. Pressure builds. Civil rights organizations point to men like Miller when they argue for change. They ask a blunt question: if a black sailor can earn the Navy Cross on the first day of the war, what justification is there for keeping him out of gunnery schools, technical ratings, or officer training in peacetime? The answer shifts from silence to action. On July 26, 1948, President Harry S. Truman signs Executive Order 9981. The order directs equality of treatment and opportunity in the armed forces, effectively beginning the process of desegregation in the U.S. military. It does not fix everything overnight, but it changes the rulebook. From that point, on paper, there is no longer a messman-only ceiling for black sailors. In practice, the Navy takes time to catch up. Attitudes do not change as quickly as documents. But over the 1950s and 1960s, more black sailors move into technical ratings. Some become petty officers in engineering, communications, aviation. A few, gradually, receive commissions as officers. Many of them have heard the name Doris Miller. They know the outline of his story, the big Texan who picked up a .50 at Pearl and fought back when everyone else was still trying to find their stations. They see in him a proof of concept, evidence that courage and competence are not limited by branch, rate, or color. Meanwhile, historians and veterans organizations fight another battle, the one over memory. They push to keep the facts straight, that he was a mess attendant, not a trained gunner, that he stepped into a gunner's role without instruction, that his actions were voluntary, not ordered in every detail. They argue that his story is not just a human interest piece but a tactical case study in initiative under fire. In training lectures on damage control and general quarters, officers sometimes reference his actions. The lesson is simple: when the plan falls apart, when assigned magazines are flooded, when gunners are casualties, when communications break down, the men who step forward, who pick up the work that needs doing without waiting to be told, can change the outcome of minutes that matter. In the 1970s and 1980s, the Navy begins to honor him in steel. A Knox-class frigate, USS Miller, F-1091, carries his name, a signal that the institution he served now acknowledges him at the level of a commissioned warship. For years, the ship steams across the world's oceans with his name on the stern and the bow, a moving reminder that a mess attendant once stood behind a gun and refused to let it sit silent. Later, facilities and buildings on bases are named for him. Portraits and plaques mark his story in museums and memorials. At Pearl Harbor, exhibits tell visitors about the big messman on West Virginia who fired a .50 caliber gun until the belts ran out, then carried the wounded instead. For the Navy's gunnery schools, his actions underline several points that eventually shape doctrine and training. Cross-training in emergencies. While formal specialization remains important, the value of teaching every sailor at least basic handling of small arms and shipboard weapons becomes clearer. In combat, the nearest trained man might be dead. The nearest living man might be a cook or clerk. Emphasis on initiative. After-action reviews from Pearl Harbor highlight that rigid adherence to peacetime job descriptions can be deadly when surprise and chaos dominate. Men like Miller, who adapt rapidly and seek ways to contribute, are exactly the kind of behavior commanders want in crisis. Anti-aircraft readiness. Pearl Harbor shows what happens when ammunition is locked, guns are unmanned, and crews are not fully synchronized at dawn. Later carriers, cruisers, and battleships maintain higher states of readiness in dangerous waters, especially at sunrise and sunset, with key guns manned and ready. The idea that a ship can be caught completely flat-footed fades. At the human level, his story travels even farther. In schools far from the sea, history textbooks and teachers begin to mention him alongside the better-known narratives of the war. Some students see themselves in him, in his limited opportunities, in the way he was underestimated, in the moment when he was tested and came through. For them, the details matter. They learned that on December 7, 1941, his official job was to serve breakfast, clean quarters, and handle laundry, and that when torpedoes tore open his ship's side, he went where he thought he could help. That when his assigned magazine was destroyed, he reported to the ship's crossroads instead of freezing. That when he was told to move wounded, he did it. That when he found an unmanned gun, he climbed into the seat, took a fast lesson, and fired. They learned that he stayed until the ammunition was gone and the ship was going down. And they learned that after all of that, the institution he served still struggled to say his name out loud at first, still boxed him into a narrow role, still sent him back into harm's way on a thin-skinned escort carrier that would vanish in a single explosion. The story does not hide those contradictions. It lays them out as part of what war really looks like: bravery and bureaucracy, heroism and delay, progress and resistance sharing the same cramped deck. In the long arc of naval history, his career is short, from enlistment in 1939 to his death in 1943. He never wears officer's stripes. He never commands a division, a gun crew, or a ship. He doesn't write a memoir. There's no quiet retirement with speeches, reunions, or old shipmates reminiscing on a porch. What he leaves is one morning and its aftermath. A Sunday at 7:55, at a battleship's mooring in Pearl Harbor. A mess attendant who should have been off duty in a laundry space, then at an ammunition magazine that no longer existed, then on a bridge cradling his wounded captain, then behind a .50 caliber Browning, then carrying his wounded shipmates through smoke and fire. A young man who, on another day in another war, dies in the dark when a torpedo finds a magazine on an escort carrier before dawn, with no cameras, no witnesses, no chance to fight back. And a line of sailors, soldiers, and civilians who, hearing that story, push a little harder on the walls that limited him. Decades after the last shot of World War II, the modern U.S. Navy looks very different from the one that recruited him. Black sailors serve in every rating and specialty. Many wear anchors on their collars as chiefs. Some wear gold stripes as officers and command entire ships, squadrons, and fleets. They operate complex radar systems, nuclear reactors, missile batteries, jet aircraft. They stand behind weapon stations more advanced than any .50 caliber mount on Battleship Row. Their training is formal and structured, not improvised in the middle of an air raid. But in gunnery lectures, damage control drills, and leadership courses, instructors still reach back for examples. They talk about initiative. They talk about what to do when everything is on fire at once, when the plan is gone, when the only question left is whether you will move toward the danger or away from it. And somewhere in that conversation, sooner or later, the instructors or the students mention a name: Dorie Miller. A mess attendant, a cook, a son from Waco, Texas. A man who everyone underestimated until the moment he gripped a Browning .50 caliber machine gun and drew a line in the smoke-filled air over Pearl Harbor. His war ended in silence under the Central Pacific. His story did not.